Higher ISO on the BMPCC 4K can actually produce a cleaner low-light image than the lower one. That might sound completely backwards, but it makes sense once you understand how dual native ISO works. Let's start with the most important part, the two gain ranges. The BMPCC 4K has two native ISO values, 400 and 3200. The first gain range covers ISO 100 through 1000. The second range begins at ISO 1250 and continues up to ISO 25600. This means that the higher ISO doesn't simply mean more noise. There is a major hardware change between 1000 ISO and 1250. At ISO 1250, the camera switches to its second analog gain stage, which is designed to handle low-light scenes with a cleaner noise floor. Because of that, ISO 1250 can give you much cleaner shadows than ISO 1000, despite being the higher number. That's the first rule to remember. ISO 100 to 1000 is the low gain range. ISO 1250 and above is the high gain range. Now let's quickly talk about the extreme values above ISO 6400. From ISO 8000 upward, dynamic range begins stepping down. The camera applies more gain, which can make extremely dark parts of the image easier to see and may rescue a shot that would otherwise be unusable. So I would treat ISO 8000 and above as emergency settings. They can be genuinely useful for extremely dark nighttime shots, especially when the alternative is not getting a shot at all. Now, I normally use ISO 400 in the lower range and ISO 3200 in the higher range. They are simple, reliable starting points. But that doesn't mean that other ISO values are useless. This is where the dynamic range chart becomes important. Inside each gain range, changing ISO does not suddenly give the sensor more total dynamic range. Instead, it changes where middle gray sits inside the available range. In simple terms, it changes how much room you have above middle gray for highlights and how much room you have below it for shadows. To make it easier, let's compare the two extreme values inside the first range, ISO 100 and ISO 1000. At ISO 100, more of the available range is placed below middle gray. If you expose the scene according to ISO 100, you have to give the sensor more real light to reach the correct brightness. That usually gives you cleaner, better exposed shadows. The trade-off is that you have less room above middle gray before bright areas clip. At ISO 1000, the balance moves in the opposite direction. More of the available range is placed above middle gray, giving you additional highlight headroom, and less range remains below middle gray, and if you expose according to ISO 1000, the sensor receives less real light. That can make the shadows noisier. So imagine that you are filming a bright scene with clouds, windows, reflections, or other important highlight detail. In that situation, ISO 1000 may actually be more useful than ISO 100. By exposing the scene accordingly to ISO 1000, you place middle gray lower and create more room for the brightest parts of your image. This is why there is no single perfect ISO for every scene. ISO 400 and 3200 are excellent general starting points, but the other values let you fine-tune how the available dynamic range is distributed. There is one important detail here. Simply changing the ISO number without changing the actual exposure doesn't magically capture additional highlight or shadow information. To change the recorded balance, you also need to expose the scene according to that ISO. This also explains how ISO works when recording Blackmagic RAW. In BRAW, ISO is stored as editable metadata. You can change the decoded ISO later inside DaVinci Resolve, but only within the gain range selected during recording. So a clip captured between 100 and 1000 remains a low gain recording. You cannot turn it into a true high gain clip afterward. Changing ISO in Resolve also cannot replace exposure that was missing while recording. It cannot recover highlights that physically clipped, and it cannot recreate clean shadow information when just too little light reached the sensor. So before increasing ISO, always look for ways to improve the real exposure. Reduce or remove ND filters, and adjust the shutter angle only when the resulting motion blur is appropriate for that shot. So here is the simple workflow I recommend. Start at ISO 400 when you have enough light. When the scene becomes too dark for the lower range, switch to ISO 3200. Use the other values inside each range when you intentionally want to favor highlights protection or cleaner shadows. Treat ISO 8000 and above as emergency options that can rescue an extremely dark shot but reduce the total dynamic range of the image. And most importantly, always remember that the amount of real light reaching the sensor matters more than the ISO number. And if you want to learn how to expose even better using false colors, check out this video next. Thanks for watching, and remember, let your films be shot by reality.